Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. And, we got Paul Jobson, my co-host. I'm Phil Dark, your host. And today we have a lot of fun. I know it's going to be a lot of fun coming your way. We got a great conversation with JP Dellacamera. JP has been broadcasting for probably almost as long as I've been alive. So he has been broadcasting a really, really long time, done 16 World Cups and 3 Olympics and a whole lot more. And he is now the president of the communications media for Major Arena Soccer League. Before we get to JP, Paul, you doing all right? You doing all right? Have you thought out yet from the last time we talked? You know, you were talking about some real
I know
cold
I need
Texas
to apologize for being so wimpy on the podcast the last 2 times, but we went from 30 degrees to 70 within a 24-hour period. That's Texas for you. So yeah. I love it. We're back into happy mode here in Waco, Texas. So yeah, a lot more positive vibes coming from the Jobson house now, where the boys can run around outside and not come in like icicles. So we're all good here, man. Things are great.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to talk to JP today. Somebody that we probably all know, or at least have heard in our lifetime, if we're true soccer fans. So excited to jump in with JP here, Phil. But how are things in the Dark family?
We're doing great too. You know, my daughter is continuing to play the backup emergency fourth keeper role on her varsity team there. Freshman stepping in. I'm very proud because, you know, I'm proud of her just stepping in as a freshman saying, I got it. No problem. Let's do this. And it says a lot about her and her confidence and just her role as a teammate, you know, just saying they need it. I'll do it. Let's do it. You know? So that's one of the highlights for me. Yeah, we got a lot more, but I want to get to it with JP. So we're going to do that now. And JP, how you doing?
Doing great. You guys are talking about cold. I'm in Connecticut in the Northeast, and it was close to 0 when you factored in the wind chill for the past few days. No snow here, so that part is great, but it's been bitter cold. We're looking forward to it warming up a little bit this weekend.
Yeah, that's kind of
JP, you don't have to live in the north, right? Like you could come.
Yeah, I'm a Boston guy, though. I'm a Boston guy. I don't have the accent anymore. Had to get rid of that in broadcasting school. But, you know, I've always been there. I've lived in different places, many different places across the country, some very nice places. But, you know, New England has really been my home for decades.
Yeah, Paul and I really show our wimpiness, as he was talking about. I'm a Northern California guy, born and raised in SoCal, and he's, you know, Texas now and has been in other warmer spots. And so, you know, we had Keely Hagan on recently, and she was telling us her Apple weather app said it was -0 at that point. As we said, it was the glass half empty weather app.
Yeah.
But you know, we want to talk about things more important than weather here. So we want to get right into it with you, just as far as, you know, love to hear your story. We know kind of where we've seen you on TV. We've seen you broadcast in these very important games. But how did a guy whose first love is hockey, being a Northeast boy, end up being one of the most known voices in U.S. soccer? And can you just share about that and just your story and and how you got to be where you're at today?
Growing up in Boston back in the day, you wouldn't believe it today where the New England Patriots are, but they were the Boston Patriots then. They couldn't sell out games. They were looking for new ownership all the time. Celtics were winning championships, couldn't fill their building. Red Sox were the Red Sox, you know, say no more there. The Bruins were #1. So I grew up as a hockey fan. Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, Derek Sanderson. Ironically, my favorite player was Sanderson, who was a bit of a disturber, chippy guy, cocky guy, none of which I ever considered myself to be. So he was like the anti-me, and I rooted for him. Like, that was my favorite player. But the Bruins sold out all the time, televised every game, including, back in those days, games on the West Coast. Nobody else was really doing that. So I grew up as a hockey fan, started off the way everybody else did, minor league hockey. I was in the minor leagues with guys that you would know today from the NHL, including Doc Emmerich, who was one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest. And I spent 10 years looking for an NHL job and never was able to land one. Back in those days, NHL was much smaller than it is today. Maybe 1 or 2 jobs would open up each year. I had a shot at a few of them, never got it. And then one day I thought about making a change, and that's what I did. Indoor soccer was 2 hours away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for me, that was a game-changing experience. I wanted, after 10 years of, don't even know how many minor league bus trips I made, how many miles were on my body, but so many. And I thought I may never get a break. And I always loved soccer. Thought the indoor soccer was like hockey on grass, if you will. And I thought I could call it almost the same way. So auditioned for it, got it. And it was a big game changer for me, because I went from, when I was working in minor league hockey, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania. We won 3 straight championships, taught me a lot about, winning and teamwork and sacrifice and all that, success. But we and I, big fish in a small pond in Erie, Pennsylvania. We went from that to being a small fish in the ocean in Pittsburgh. And it was a great experience. It's where I really cut my teeth in indoor soccer, and then got one break after another. One door opened, took it, ended up doing my first World Cup in 1986. And then I would say the rest is history, but it all started mostly with the indoor soccer.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people back in the day getting, and even that's a good lesson. We talked with another friend about taking that. That episode was called "Take the Meeting," right? Just take the opportunity when it presents itself. When that door opens, walk through it, even if it's not exactly what you're looking for, because you never know where it will lead, right? I mean, who knew it would lead to where you are today? But I always remember those games. I remember those indoor soccer games, the California Surf back in the day, and the NASL, and then you're playing at Anaheim Convention Center. I was a little ball boy for that team. And and just remembering the as they say, never despise small beginnings, right? Because to go from that to where it is today, as far as MLS and the US soccer and all that, we're going to talk about that later in the episode. But I love that. And have you, what would you recommend or suggest to somebody who's, maybe where you were back then, as far as it's a different world today, it's a different thing, but what principles remain the same as far as the industry, as far as taking the opportunity and just really not, like I said, not despising the small beginnings, because you're probably going to have them.
Yeah, I think, first of all, you have to believe in yourself and have a lot of patience, because I think the longer you're in this business, the more bad things could happen to you and will happen to you, but also the more good things that will happen to you. You have to be able to balance that, handle the disappointment the same way you handle the success, and don't let any one moment, good or bad, define you. A lot of really talented people have given up in the business because they didn't get an opportunity, and maybe they were in a financial situation where they couldn't continue to pursue it. I would encourage anyone who believes in themselves, who has a goal, if you can stay with it. You might have to take a step back. Maybe you do it part-time and hope that it leads to full-time. But if you really believe in yourself and think you can get it done, don't give up on it unless you really have to.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, JP, I mean, I think you see that, just in sports in general, when you hit the next level, how resilient are you at the next level? How much do you really love what you're doing? And when you hit that next level, I think you start to realize how much you either really do love it and you're willing to do the work, or you're not. How much of that played into your career? I mean, how much did you just really love what you were doing, and what played into that? Was it more the people you were around, or just that ultimate belief in yourself and what you felt like you were supposed to do?
I think, Paul, you always hear people say, in this business anyway, I don't feel like it's a job. It feels like fun. It's what I want to do. I'd be the last person to complain about how much work is involved, how much travel is involved, because it's a great gig, and I've loved every minute of it. And I think that I'm always learning. I think if I thought that I knew it all today, I should get out, because why keep doing it? Are you doing it for the money? I'm doing it because I love what I do. I will be terrible in retirement whenever that day comes. I don't even like to say the word, because I don't have any hobbies. Like, this is my hobby. This is my life. I know it's still a lot of work, but I've never looked at it as work. It's research. And that's what I would tell, college kids that complain about homework. Don't go into this business if you're complaining about homework, because it's all about the homework. And then your test, your final exam is the game itself.
Yeah, I like that. That leads really well into kind of my next question for you is, you talked about why. What is your why? What is your personal why? What is your life purpose? And how are you living that out?
Nobody's ever asked me that. I don't think I ever think about it. I think
Yeah.
your goal is to be the best person that you can be. Try to help others who need help. Try to lead as best a life as you can. But I've never thought about it, because I think if you have to think about that, if you have to think about how do I become a good person or a better person, seems like you need some help, right? It should be easy, right? Should be easy to be a nice person, be nice to everybody. It should be easy. So I think that's why I've never thought about it. I try to lead as good a life as I can, help others when I can. And in this business, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of broadcasters, you may be surprised at that, will help anybody, if they're just asked. We're always getting asked by somebody to listen to a tape, or can you recommend, or can you put in a good word for me? And I found that not just myself, a lot of people in my business will do that for a lot of young people. I think that's great.
Yeah, JP, that's great. I found that to be true just in the time I've been around. And I know people not at your level necessarily, but people in that industry that are they're so giving of their time that you can tell they really love what they do, because they want to pour into those that are around. Having been a coach and asking of those guys time after time of things, and hoping in response I'm being as good to them as they are to me. And I think sometimes you guys can take the brunt of things, being the voice of something or the face of something. But there's a lot. I agree with you. The folks I've interacted with that are really good at their job truly do love the people that they're working with, and I think sometimes feel like they're working with and working for those that they're broadcasting with. Is that accurate? Like when you're broadcasting a national team game, do you feel like you're working with the national team, but also kind of working for those national team players or whoever you're
Sure.
broadcasting?
Sure. I think I'm
Yeah.
working for a lot of people, when I did the last 13 years with the Philadelphia Union, I'm not just working for the Philadelphia Union. I'm working for myself. I'm working for anybody that's tuning into the game. The great fans of Philadelphia that were watching us on TV or listening on the radio or on the internet, or, however they gathered up Philadelphia Union information. You do the best that you can, be as honest as you can, when you're calling games, but you're working for a lot of people. And if you're doing a game, that's a national team game, then your audience is further expanded, right? You've got a country that's rooting for your national team to win. It doesn't put any more pressure on you. You're just calling the game. It's fun for me to do those games. I enjoy the games. I enjoy the better games more, I would say, than the bad games. Like, we've all watched bad games in any sport. There have been bad Super Bowls, there have been bad World Cups, but you still enjoy what you do. It's just the better the game, obviously, the more you're going to enjoy it, especially the games that now live on in history, right? Decades ago, there were probably some great broadcasters, and we don't even get to hear them anymore because there was no YouTube, there was no internet. There's no way to go back and find this. But now, since whatever year you want to say, the 80s, 90s, everything is recorded, so everything lives on.
Yeah.
The good and the bad.
Yes.
Right. Well, and there's so much in
hopefully
there.
more good.
Yeah,
More good,
right.
yes.
Well, I mean, you think about that, even as you're talking about that, I imagine other people did what I did, which was go back and just think of those moments, right? The miracle on ice, right? I mean, you could just close your eyes and picture it and listen and you hear it, right? And that's just part of, and I think that's what a great broadcaster like yourself is part of that, where you are just part of that game. You're not distracting from it. You're not, you're hopefully adding to it a little bit to making it more, but it's someone that is there, that's just part of it, instilled in that. And I think that's something that that's what I was thinking about at that point. I imagine our audience was as well.
Yeah, you want to be embellishing the game as an announcer. You're not the story, you're not the show. People are not tuning in to watch you, they're tuning in to watch the event. And you don't want to ruin the event for them. You don't want to spoil the event. You want to help them to understand the event, I guess. So inform, educate, entertain are the three things that, to me, make up a great show. If you can do two of those well, whichever two those are, it's probably a good show, maybe a very good show. If you can hit all three, it's probably a great show. And you just don't want to get in the way or ruin a big event, a big moment. You know, Al Michaels was perfect. Imagine if we didn't have video of that.
Right.
You know, one of the greatest calls in the history of sports, and one of the greatest announcers of all time.
Yep.
Right? Al Michaels.
Absolutely.
And if we
Absolutely.
didn't have that video, and like you're saying, you can picture it. You can close your eyes, you can picture it, you can hear his voice, you can hear his call.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, the other lesson that too that I heard in those answers were the idea of leaders are learners, right? As you said, you're never stopping learning. And that's so huge, because a lot of people say, well, you're at the apex. Like, what do you have? And a lot of people would do that, but you look at the best of the best, and they are continually learning in the game. You know, look at the Cristiano Ronaldo is a guy who never stops training, never stops learning. You know, the Messi's, the other guys, those guys are continually, and everyone say, well, you're the best. Yeah, exactly. That's how they got there. That's how they're going to stay there. But the other was the accessibility part, because as you said, I like to make myself available to people. And I think a lot of people need to hear that, to understand that the people who can hopefully teach you and you can learn from, most of them are accessible. If they're people you'd want to actually learn from, reach out to them, you know, and it might be they have to go through a couple people. It might be that you have to do some different things, but reach out to people and give them the chance to say no. Don't just assume a no.
Right.
Would you speak to that?
Yeah, unless you ask somebody, right? I mean, you might think as a youth coach, your team is playing. Paul, you said you're in Texas, right?
Yes.
I mean, you might be a high school coach. You've got FC Dallas there, and you might think, well, there's no way they're going to let me watch a training session. Well, there might be. You know, if you ask, if you send them an email, make a phone call, talk to PR. You know, you're an aspiring high school or college coach, and you just love to sit in on a session, you might be surprised at the answer, because these guys were in your position maybe at another time in their life, and somebody opened a door for them, let them coach in their academy or with a youth team, and now they're the coach of their MLS team. You might be surprised that they'll say, come on in, what's your schedule? Can't hurt, right? And if they say no, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
That's right. It's like I tell my kids, if, you know, worst they can say is no, and then you're exactly the spot you were before you asked. So don't worry about it. And if they say yes, who knows what can happen with that. So it kind of goes to the fixed mindset versus growth mindset, all those things we've talked about on this show. But I want to kind of move on to the next thing. Actually goes to again, similar to what we've talked about. We talked about a lot of defining moment. I mean, you could go a list of the different people. All the people need to do is Google you to get all the bio, all the history, all the different games that you've done, which is some amazing, incredible games and moments in U.S. soccer, and global soccer as well. But what would you say is the defining moment in your career, and why was it so impactful? What did you learn from it?
1999 Women's World Cup final. I think for sure is the defining moment. If you asked anybody else, it was the best goal call of my life and the shortest one. All I said was goal, because I had already set it up that if Chastain had scored, you know, that they would win. I didn't want to talk over those amazing pictures. I thought the show was well produced, well directed, and that's the director's moment to shine. The cutaways, you know, showing the joy of the U.S. players, the fans, the disappointment of China, as it was a big game for them as well. Again, it's a big moment, and you don't want to ruin that moment. But that would be the defining moment for me, and for a lot of reasons. Remember what it did. It was a defining moment for women's soccer, a defining moment for soccer in general. Remember, U.S. men had finished last at the World Cup 1 year before that, and it was a defining moment for women's sports. Until recently, I think it was the 2015 Women's World Cup that Fox did. I mean, the ratings, the numbers were staggering.
Yeah,
for sports, not for women, for sports, and they were mainstream. You know, the players were doing commercials. They were on the David Letterman show. CBS News was covering them. Like everybody was covering them. That was a milestone moment. And probably the interesting part about that, guys, is that when I do interviews and I'm asked, you know, did I know at that time how big it was? You know, the answer is no. I knew it was big, but when you're doing it, it's in the moment. You're not thinking anything other than this is the moment. But if you asked me that day when the game was over, like how big it was, I still wouldn't have known how big it was. 5 years later, 10 years later, today, you know, we're talking about it today. That was 1999. This is 2023. We're still talking about it. That's how big it was. And if you had asked me that day, I would never have known that we would still be talking about that, because maybe other moments would have surpassed it. But you always remember that first big one there. And I would say that was the one.
Mm. Yeah, that's so,
I mean,
that's so good. And I think one of the things there that stuck out to me is just less is more sometimes.
Without a
Right?
doubt. In broadcasting, 100%. I've always told younger people, study for, you know, as long as you can. You should know. One of the hardest things to know, I would say, unless you've done this for a long time, is when to shut it down, because there's so much information out there today. When I did the 1986 World Cup, you'd have to tell me, I don't remember this, but I don't think we had computers then. You know, we didn't have internet for sure. I'm trying to remember how we even got game notes. Whereas today, there's so much information out there that you really have to know when to shut it down. Your brain, your mind can only consume so much, and you're only going to use about 30% max of what you study for. So imagine studying for X amount of hours and knowing that only 30% of what you use should be used. I would say if you use more, you've talked too much during the game. 30%, that's not a lot. It's a small number when you think about it, but there's so much information out there. But today, much easier in some ways to do the job because there's so much out there, but it's also complicated by the fact that when do you stop, and which media websites are the more accurate? You know, on Twitter, everybody brags about Twitter, but how much wrong stuff is out on Twitter? You know what I mean? Because people want to get the news, get the sports out as quickly as they can, and worry about the facts sometimes later, unfortunately. So you've got to know what you're reading, what's the source, how credible is it, and when do I stop? Especially if you've got in a World Cup or Olympics where you've got maybe 5 games in 5 days. If you don't know when to turn it off, it's not going to be a good experience for you.
That's right. That's right. And you just described there the most important thing I learned in law school, which is when to stop researching. And because you could research forever, and there's so much. And like you said, I mean, you basically described it. What's credible, what's not, how can you know, how can you distinguish? Those are things that are so important for literally anything that you do. Coaches, listen to that. There's so much garbage on YouTube, and there's so much great stuff on YouTube.
Right.
To know the difference is one of the most important things you can learn.
Right. And I think you don't know that right away, you know, so you have to learn that, right? So over time, you'll know, who to trust, who and what to trust, and also what not to trust. And I think one of the hardest parts, I don't know if you have this with the legal stuff, is that, you read some great stat, and while you're doing your research, you come up with something else that contradicts that stat that you just read. Now you've got 2 different stories. Which one is right? So you got to try to find a third source, whatever that is. And if you can't, don't use that stat, because you got a 50-50 shot of that being right. I don't like those odds. I've got to be in the 90s, before I want to use something. 50-50, I just drop it. It's not worth putting on air.
Yeah, that's got to be crazy, especially being maybe in a World Cup, and there's so many, I would think, distractions too of news, things that maybe even call it gossip, things that are going on behind the scenes that aren't even really soccer related, that get out there because of social media that maybe didn't 15 years ago, that and you're like, well, is that really worth even talking about? Other people may be talking about it, but it's probably not something that you're going to bring up on a broadcast, because you're trying to be true to the game itself and not be distracting. I'm sure those are not probably for you difficult things to navigate, but I'm sure with some of the younger guys and girls coming through that, because it's the hot button on the social media sites, but it may not be the thing that needs to be discussed during a broadcast.
Right. I think the hardest part, Paul, is that, first of all, you'll always hear things off the record. If you hear something off the record, you cannot say it. There's no way you can say it, or you won't get that information again. And some of the best things that I've learned have been off the record, right? So you have to know that. Also, what's important to the viewer, and how much can you say about it? So you'll have conversations, you'll have meetings with producers, like where I work at Fox now. They'll give you guidance and direction on, what can we say, how should we address this controversial topic? Don't hide from it, but what can we say? And also realizing that when people tune in to watch a game, they're really tuning in to watch the game, right? That's my opinion. They want to watch the game. So the more you can talk about the game and focus on the game is great. If there's a controversial story, how do you weave it in without not alienating the viewer, but without distracting the viewer, right? Because you don't want to be doing a game and have somebody say later, all they talked about was this. I had to turn it off. All they kept talking about was that controversy. I wanted to know more about the game. So those are the things that you juggle, I guess. And I think the more you do this, the more you know the balance, right? The more you do it. But for somebody young that's coming in, and there's controversy, I could see where that could be an overwhelming moment for them, but they'll learn.
Yeah, it's funny, JP. I've had some moments like that where I've had to turn off broadcasters, having been a college coach for almost 20 years and having to watch college broadcasters, a lot of young up and coming broadcasters, and like, man, okay, I'm not really listening anyway. I'm watching the game. I'm analyzing film. I'm probably should be watching the televised game anyway, but it has some of the best shots, action and camera angles. And sometimes I just have to turn them off because there's nothing about the game going on. But it's interesting that you even throw that out there. But you talked a little bit about the defining moment of '99, which I remember, and how it really kind of birthed the league, which is kind of how Phil and I met. With my wife playing in Atlanta, and then you were there quite a bit. And I remember '86. You said that was your first broadcast. I was actually, funny story, I was watching the World Cup in the house of Clint Mathis in 1986. They were the only house that had the satellite dish that could bring in the World Cup into our little town. So we're sitting on his floor, which is funny thinking now, like what a great player he was for the U.S. and you've called his matches as well.
Yep.
But in all the matches that you've done, you've broadcast matches, you've talked to great players, you've talked to great coaches, you've maybe talked to not great players and not great coaches. You've kind of done it all in that. As you've kind of watched the game and learned the game, what are some lessons that you think you've learned from watching and analyzing the game that maybe you wouldn't have learned having played the game, if that makes sense? What are some life lessons you feel like you learned from the game of soccer as a broadcaster?
For sure, the teamwork part of it. It's never a one person thing. As being from New England, Tom Brady is the GOAT, no question about it. Yeah. Tom Brady will always credit his teammates. He won 7 Super Bowls. He didn't win them by himself. He's always credited, his teammates. When we used to interview Mia Hamm, it was never a good interview because we wanted Mia to talk about herself, and she would never do that. She would always talk about Julie and Carla and Brandy and Joy and Christine, Brianna. That's it. So I'm thinking, well, that's not a good interview. I want to know why Mia Hamm is like the greatest, right? So I think that's what you learn, that it is a team game. When we do a broadcast, I'm really only as good as the person that's beside me. I never wanted to do a game where somebody said, you are really good, but the analyst was not, because that's a reflection of me. I'm supposed to get the best out of the analyst. So I would always enjoy the compliments that said, I enjoyed listening to you two guys, or if it was a woman, I enjoyed listening to you and whoever the woman was that I was working with, right? Because it was a team. And even to the point where I don't like it when somebody would say, well, you guys sounded great, but who produced that game or who directed that game? The pictures were all over the place. You wanted somebody to say, that was a great show. And I think that's what they said about the 1999 Women's World Cup final. But it is a team. And when I got my Colin Jose Media Award at the Hall of Fame in Frisco in 2018, one of the great off the field moments for me, in my speech, I said that award was for, and I listed all these jobs, right? From stage manager to audio to producer to director to analyst to all the people that helped me, because I consider that a team award. So I think that's what I learned in sports. It started when I was with the Erie Blades. We won those 3 straight championships. I saw what it took, to get there. I saw the sacrifice, the hard work, the dedication, and the fact that you don't win 3 straight titles in any sport with one person. Michael Jordan, greatest for me of all time, but without the other guys there, without Scottie Pippen, without Steve Kerr, Dennis Rodman, does he win all of those titles? I don't think so.
No. That's so good. I mean, that leads, I think, right into the next thing we want to talk about here is now you're the president of communications and media for Major Arena Soccer League. What lessons did you take from the game, the actual game of soccer, as you've been broadcasting for over these years and learning about all that you just talked about? And what have you taken from that and are now using that in your leadership of the MASL? And how are you using those lessons?
That's a good question. I think with the old MISL, if we go back to those days, it was the premier league in this country. We had no outdoor soccer. So that was number one. So the first thing I learned when I took over with the MASL, when people would say, you think you'll get it back to where it was? No, that's not realistic, because Major League Soccer, 29 teams now, they could have as many teams probably as they want. Very successful now, MLS. And so the best players that come to this country are going to play there. You also have USL, you have NWSL. You can watch any game in any country in the world right now on your laptop, on your smartphone, on your TV, whatever that is. And we didn't have that back then. So indoor soccer, the first lesson I learned, don't have unrealistic expectations. It is never going to be what it was. It can't be. There's too many other things that are going on. But can it be better than what we inherited? 100%. So our goal when we started this was to, and this is our second year. First year, we said we want to improve everything that we do by 30%. We thought that was realistic. And in some cases, we did more than 30%. In others, maybe slightly less. Right now, we have a 14-team league, 2 teams in Mexico, 14 different owners. I'm sure, in the NFL and the NBA and the NHL that say the same thing. I mean, there's deeper pockets there for sure, but they would probably say it's a diverse group of owners. Some want to spend as much money as they can. Some want to do the bare minimum. Some want to tank for the draft choices, whatever that is, right? You don't have everybody thinking on the same page. So I think taking over this league with Keith Tozer, Shep Messing, and myself, all friends, all fans of the indoor game, we thought, let's make changes when we can, where we can. Let's try to get owners, if we can, to think league first, not team first. And in some ways, we've made some inroads there. But I think it started, guys, with more of a realistic expectation, right? It's not the old MISL, nor is it the NHL, nor is it the NBA, and so you've got to find your place, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think there is a place. There's definitely a place for indoor soccer in our landscape. I think the thing that pleased me the most was what we saw on the field of play. I mean, these guys are really good. It's not like Jungle and Terlecki and Segoda and Tattoo of the past, but these guys are very good at what they do.
Yeah. And Paul threw out and name dropped Clint Mathis and, watching the World Cup with him. just because that's what Paul does. No, he actually doesn't. So that
He's
was,
a name dropper. Yeah, I heard that about Paul.
It was just that's I know. I wasn't gonna say it, but since you brought it up,
I've heard it.
But I went to the Shep Messing goalkeeper camp at UC Santa Barbara back in the day. So there
Nice.
it is. Since you brought up Shep, I thought I'd just throw that out there. That's all I got. That's all I got.
No,
So
Shep is
anyway.
great. He's a longtime friend. I've always said he's the smartest guy I know. I will always ask his opinion on anything. And if he doesn't know, he will tell me he doesn't know. And those are the smartest people, because I've never known anyone that's known it all. I've met people that thought they knew it all. But when somebody says to you, I really don't know, that tells you something, right? They're not making it up. And Shep will tell me, hey, I really don't know. Maybe you should ask this person. That's not my area of expertise. But remember, Shep is Harvard educated. So smart guy. Yeah,
that's one of the best answers you can give if you actually don't know.
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's
nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. I've had people say to me, well, you've done this for so long, you must have experienced this. And I've said, honestly, I have not, surprisingly maybe, but I have not. And therefore I can give you an opinion of what I would do if it happened to me, but it's just a guess because it's not happened to me.
On a podcast where we're talking about leadership, that's a great leadership lesson in itself. Sometimes not knowing and being able to admit that you don't know is a great leadership attribute.
And isn't that, Paul, how you learn? Isn't that how you learn?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't know it, how many times do you say to a wife or a child, I'm not sure about that. Let me Google that. But we couldn't Google in the 80s, right? But you can Google now. So if there's information that you need, Google it. You'll get the answer.
Yeah. And I like to add to that, like, when you find that out, can you please let me know too? Because I'd like now I want to know what the answer to that,
Sure.
So, JP, with your experience through U.S. soccer, just soccer in general, just over the years, and how you've seen it grow and develop and kind of ebb and flow, from the youth ranks up to professional to international. What are some things that you see, maybe some trends that you see that you really like the direction that the game is going, and maybe some things that you see where you're like, I'm not sure if we should be going this direction as a country as we look at the development and growth of U.S. soccer?
I think from a national team level, you see them starting at younger ages, whatever that is, whether it's under 15, under 14s, whatever that is. I think years ago, you never thought about those players, perhaps, or that age group on the men's side and the women's side. So I think U.S. soccer has grown to the point where they're looking at younger players and being able to develop them on both sides, right? There's been more tournaments that they've entered into, more dollars being spent there. I think that part of it is great. More administrative help. Before Ernie Stewart left, you had Ernie Stewart, you had Brian McBride, you had Kate Marcraft, 3 people in high level positions. Whereas before, if you go back several years ago, you had like maybe one person, now you had 3 of them in those positions. So I think that's been a plus. They have been successful with bringing in various coaches. I think if I had to think about anything that was negative, I think we have to find a way to get more experienced coaches, because I've always heard players say this, that you want the better coaches at the youngest levels to teach them, right? Because at a certain point, whatever that age is that you want to say, you're done in terms of learning how to play, right? The rest of it is playing, right? So I've heard people say that maybe some of the better coaches should be on the youngest of teams. And when you think about that, that's not where the glamour is, right? Like if you want to spend money on somebody, it's with a full national team, right? Or the under 23s or under 18s or whatever level you want to take, not somebody that's 10 or 12 years old. But, when did guys like Messi develop? Not at the age of 16, definitely not at the age of 16. So I think that's something to think about for the future. But I think we have to figure out a way to get our young players boys and girls, that don't have the financial means to be involved in the game. I think we're missing a lot of players in a lot of areas. I mean, we've got 50 states, right? You can't tell me that there's not kids in some of these states that we don't talk about much, smaller states. Can't tell me that we don't have, maybe the next Messi is there, right? Maybe the next Messi is somewhere in Florida or Texas or California, and we don't know about that person, boy or girl, because they don't have the money to invest in the sport. So I think we need to find a way. You always hear the pay to play formula and all that. I think we do miss a lot of people, potential stars, not role players, potential stars, because their parents can't afford to play. If you guys have had kids in youth soccer, you know what it costs. You know what uniforms cost. You know what travel costs. Somebody's paying for coaching. It's tough if you have a child that economics in the family don't seem to work for them, where they can do that sort of thing. We need to bring those players in. So whether that's scholarship money, some kind of financial aid, whether it's corporate sponsorship, whatever it is, that's the missing piece for me.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone on that. We've had a lot of guests talk about that. We actually had Tim Ryerson on, who's trying with the Get on the Bus program, which is a great program to be able to get kids from, because that's the other thing is, even if scholarships, how do they get there? So transportation's an issue.
Point.
There's all these things that I actually hadn't thought about until we had, a couple guys on talking about that issue. And so it's something that there's so many pieces to the puzzle that, yeah, we got to figure them out, or we are going to miss a lot of people, and people wonder why we can't compete with this and that and the other country. And that's a big part of it. It's just identification and being able to keep those kids in the game. And I love that idea of training. My wife is a K-8 PE teacher, and to think about how we can get those great people to the younger ages. I mean, every school teacher is saying amen. Pay more. How do we pay those people who are developing the next generation better, so that we can attract better to those areas?
Well, you do have to pay more, right, to get that player, right? Because the better the player, probably the better team that he wants to coach, right? So what would make name a terrific player? What would make him want to coach under 8s or under 12s? If he could coach 18-year-old to 21-year-old players, right? It has to be, the money and the perks. It has to be something, right, to get them to want to do that, because it's not easy to coach at that level, right? It takes a certain person. We talked about balance before, right? How do you balance? What's too much for somebody that's 8, 9, 10 years of age? I think one of the things that we do is we burn kids out. It's got to be fun for the kid, right? If it's not fun for the kid, they're not staying. You guys know more about youth soccer than probably I will ever know, but at some age, whatever that age is, they're out because it's too much for them. The coach hasn't made it fun. It's work. It shouldn't be work for an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old. Winning isn't everything at that age, right? There's so many stories where you've heard people say, my son, who's 6 years old, is a great left back. He's a left back at 6. Isn't he just a defender or a midfielder, or he'll play wherever? He's versatile. He's a left back at 6. You pigeonholed him into him or her at that age. There is no 6-year-old left back. If there is, that's overcoaching to me.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Not gonna get an argument here. Not gonna get an argument here on that one at all.
No.
Heck, we just talked about my daughter. I trained her at 10 years old to play keeper, because you never know when your team might need one. And who knew 4 years later her team would need a 4th keeper, So the Niners can talk about that right now too. We're not going to talk about football, the American football.
Quarterbacks, you mean, right?
Yeah, the quarterback thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You know, you never know. I mean, the running back almost playing quarterback in a NFC championship game. You never know, right?
No,
So you better learn all the positions because your team might need it someday. Um, so and that goes back to being a student of the game and all that stuff too, is to be able to understand the game. You should be able to play anywhere. But we're gonna shift gears now, kind of finish it up, bring it home. We always ask these questions of our guests, and I'd love to hear your answers of this. With all the lessons you've learned directly from the game, how are you using those lessons? We've talked about how you use them in your broadcasting, how you use them in the MASL leadership, but how have you used them in your marriage, parenting, other relationships outside the game?
I think you just try to be a role model in any way that you can. With kids, my kids are older now, but I think they would be better able to tell you like how I was as a parent. I think they knew that I was strict when I needed to be, and knew when to like loosen the reins, knew when to make it fun, didn't want to pressure them. It's their life to lead. If this is what they want to be when they grow up, this is what they want to be. So I think you always have to have a balance. And one of the things that I learned is, and I learned this very early on in my career, when you talk to people, you start with a compliment, because that's easier to take the criticism that may be coming. So instead of telling someone something that they didn't do well, start with, I like what you did with this, but they're more likely, the but's coming, they know the but's coming probably when you give the compliment, but they're more likely to receive it. Sometime in the 80s, I was doing St. Louis Steamers games, and the president of Bud Sports, who was doing the games at the time, said to me, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, really enjoy listening to you, love the work that you do, you make it exciting. Kept going on, and I'm thinking, this is great. But there was a but. And he said, if you want to be better than you are, if you want to reach the highest levels, I could help you. There's some things you could improve on. So now he's got me. And I said, what was that? And he said, you need to work your analyst into the game more. And I said to him, well, I thought I'd do that. He said, you do. But he said, I want to make you better. He said, and the better he sounds, the better you both sound. And that was ingrained in me. First he started with a compliment, so he had me. And then he told me what I needed to do. And even when I pushed back and said I thought I was doing that, he said, you are. But if you want to take it to the next level, this is what you have to do. And so I think I've always been about that. Try to do the compliment part first. And the way I've lived life, I guess, and in sports as well, it's risk reward. Everything to me is risk reward. I would do that, with marriage, with parenting. Everything is risk reward. What's the good that can come with this? What's the bad that can come with this? And if the risk is, too great, it's much greater than the reward, not doing it. And it's the same with, and if anybody asks me that question, like whether it's my kids as kids or as adults or friends, it's usually the same advice that I give to them. If they're not sure what they want to do, what's the risk? What's the reward? And they'll figure it out.
There's so much good there.
Good lesson for sure. I like we call it the compliment sandwich, JP. We always finalize with a compliment too, which
I like
usually
that.
means, and if you do that, you could be much better. Kind of like you said. So
I like
compliment
that.
up front, the butt, and then finish with a compliment. It's a good compliment sandwich. It's easier to eat that way.
I like that. I may use that if you don't mind, Paul.
Feel free.
But it's funny how you remember so many things in life. It's like when your parents would say something, you would always say, boy, I don't believe that, or I hope I don't say those things when I become a parent. And then you're in a situation, you say something and you think, oh my God, I've heard that before. That was my father, or that was my mother. They said that to me, right? And so it's amazing the things that you remember. I remember that conversation. I remember where I was. It was, like I said, a St. Louis Steamers game. It was in a press box. And I remember all of that. And yet there are some conversations years later, you just don't remember them as well, right? So he did it the right way. You know, he did it probably that sandwich way, like you're saying. He started with a compliment, you know, gave me the butt, and then, you know, finished in the end with a nice exclamation point, and I was off and running.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the last thing we want to learn from you more than we already have, and continue on giving back to others. You know, what have you watched, read, or listened to that has most impacted your thinking on what this show is about, how soccer explains life and leadership?
I'm not a reader. I read a lot on the internet. I'm not a book reader. I have so many books in my house that people send me, and I'm sad to say that I don't really have the time, I guess, or the patience, you know, to go through a book. If I was a book reader, I'd probably want to read it from start to finish. I'm not one of those that could, you know, read 2 chapters, put it down, and then, you know, go the rest of it. Most of what I read is really, I'm going to say, homework related. You know, it's about the next game I'm doing or the next tournament I'm doing. What am I doing next? I always try to watch big events, though. I'm not an NFL guy, but I will watch the Super Bowl. You know, I will watch the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't have as much time as I used to for hockey, but I will watch like the bigger games. And I think you'll always learn from that, because usually the bigger games are the bigger announcers, the better announcers, and you can always learn. Like I said earlier when we started this show, you know, if I thought I knew it all, I should get out. I'm still learning. Any conversation that I have with a coach, player, referee adds to my knowledge, adds something that wasn't there before. And there's that eagerness that I still have to learn. So I always look forward to my coaches' chats or player chats, because I believe I'm going to learn something from those conversations.
Yeah, that's such an important thing to remember. As you said, don't just watch a game, you know, watch a game and learn. You know, if you're a player out there, there's so much to learn. You're talking back in the day of the MISL and nothing else. Like, we couldn't watch anything back in the 70s, 80s as a young player. There was nothing to watch.
Yep. Yep.
And
You know
today
what
you can, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, when I think about it, one of the things I haven't done as much probably since COVID, but when I used to go to games, like as a fan, I would try to watch something that I can't watch when I'm calling the game, right? So sometimes I would go to a game and just study referees' positioning, where are the assistant referees, how much running are they doing, what's their angle. Sometimes I would just look at the goalkeeper and the back four, if it's a back four, if it's a back three, you know, are they communicating? What are they doing? I'm not really watching the game. Like when I'm at home and I'm watching a game, I might be listening to announcers to hear something because I've got the next game. So I'm not watching it the same way that I would as a fan. So that's a lesson that I've learned. You know, take advantage of that when you're watching another game. Now, if it's on TV, you know, you're only seeing what the cameras are showing you, right? And you're listening to it. But if you get to go to a game, watch something else. When I was in Atlanta doing hockey, I ended up getting my NHL gig years after, when I wasn't even going for it. A door opened, then I took it. But I got to watch Atlanta Hawks games there. And LeBron was in town. He was playing for the Cavaliers at the time, not even Miami. And I just watched the first half of the game. All I watched was him. And I saw what he was doing when he had the ball, when he didn't have the ball. I saw his eyes. I saw his emotion, his passion. That's all I looked at. Didn't even look at where everybody else was on the floor. Just studied him. And if I was calling a game, and I've done basketball, but that was years ago, there's no way I could focus on LeBron. There's, you know, 4 of his teammates out there, right? And there's another team that's out there. So you couldn't do that. So I encourage anybody, any broadcaster, any coach, you know, when you're outside of your element and you're looking at something else, just take a look at things that you don't normally get a chance to look at from your own profession.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, Paul, I mean, I imagine you would agree with that too, right there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a coach who had to watch film for so many years, it's hard to even enjoy a game sometimes without finding yourself analyzing the game and being able to sit back and say, okay, what are some other things that I can watch and observe? What are some of the body languages of coaches? How do they interact with their players during a match? How do they interact with their bench or their assistant coaches? And not just analyzing the match because that's what I'm used to doing, but I totally agree with you, JP. And there's some great. I love that you analyze the officials. The officials don't get
Yeah.
enough credit in the game and the things and the
Mhm.
responsibilities they have to manage
Yeah.
through a match, and understanding their role and the load they have to carry. I think is probably very important for a broadcaster because they come into play.
Yeah.
They're the
Paul,
easy fall guy.
in the 80s, much of my knowledge came from the referees because, when the games were over, they would always want to know, this is before, video review came into play. They would say to me after a game, how was that call? Because they thought they had it, but they wanted to know. And they would be reassured if I said to them, replay showed, right on the money, or boy, that was close. We watched it three
You had to
times.
put a compliment sandwich together, baby.
Yeah. I think you missed it. The replay looks like you may have missed it, but it was a tough call, in real time. But I learned more from those guys. And the thing that I learned the most, and I remembered from the 80s, right? And you still hear announcers say this today, whether it's indoor or outdoor, they will say, I don't know why the official that was closest to the play didn't make the call. You'll hear that in all sports. And the answer is it's the angle. It's not how far you are to the play or how close you are to the play. It's the angle. And sometimes the whatever the sport is, NHL, NBA, the person that's closest to it is blocked by something else. The person farthest away may have the cleanest angle. And I was one of those guys that said that before. I would say on air, don't know why this guy made the call. This guy was much closer. And it's all about the angles. And that's what those indoor refs taught me years ago. And it applies to all sports today.
Yeah.
And
That's why I
JP,
tell.
by the way, if people are
Okay.
confused about your reference to Atlanta hockey, they were the Thrashers. They no
Correct.
longer exist. They were
5 years. I was there.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all. Yeah, I'm
We
an
were
Atlanta
both
guy,
there.
so the Atlanta teams are my teams. But I remember the Thrashers and hated that hockey disappeared.
Well,
Yeah.
I know. I think Atlanta still gets a bad sports rap when you think about it. Look at how well Atlanta United has done there coming in.
Yeah.
One of the most successful franchises, certainly off the field, with their record attendance and sponsorship and revenue and all that. And I still think, if they let the Thrashers stay there and if they had solid ownership, they'd be a strong team today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That ownership group has done a great job with United and the Falcons, of
Yep.
course. So
For sure.
Yeah, I still have that third
If Arthur
jersey.
Blank had owned the Thrashers, they'd be thriving right now.
Yeah.
yes.
I still have that third jersey from the inaugural season for the Thrashers in my closet right now. So yeah, we we were there during those years, and I started my legal career out there in Atlanta. So that's where Paul and I met, as you said. But yeah, and then it was some bad luck too, the whole Heatley thing, and the crash and all that.
That was my first year. The first game I did was, Daniel Snyder, passing away in that car accident.
Wow.
You talk about tough moments and balancing and people are tuning in, but it's kind of somber. And, that was my first game with the Thrashers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there's so much that, like we say with most of our guests, we could get you back on and talk for hours and hours, but I remember Brad Miller talked about that too, watching the game. And for young players to watch a game of pros, especially if you're live and pick one player out. And one of the things he said, just to get them on the mental health and resetting their brain, is watch someone and see how long it takes them to make 4 mistakes. And I think you could do that for broadcasting. You do that for different things, whatever your goal is, whatever we all make mistakes, and we don't focus on those things with other people. We typically just do it for ourselves. And we're like, oh, we just beat ourselves up. When you watch the pros, they're making mistakes left and right. And, we don't see that usually unless we're watching for it, but it should hopefully encourage the younger players too, and to learn from those too. What do they do after? Well, they just get right back at it
Right.
because that's what you got to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think greatness is probably defined by consistency, right? Like anybody can call a good game, coach a good game, play in a good game, but it's over time. Like that's what the greatest players, the reason why Tom Brady is the GOAT is not because of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years. He won 7 Super Bowls, right? I mean, it's the long haul. And people will say, it's easier to get there. It's easier to get to the top. It's harder to stay there in anything that you do, right? Because it's consistency. There's competition in everything, right? So whether it's, legal, teaching, whatever that is, sports, broadcasting, there's competition all the time, right? So if you stay status quo and you don't improve, or at least stay consistent, you're not going to last as long as you would like to, right? And one of the things that I've always learned as well is that, at least in broadcasting, it's probably the same with professional athletes. It's not the best moments may not be as great as you think they were, and the same with the worst moments. It's never as bad as you think. It's never as good as you think. When you watch it back, like if you've done a game, you didn't like the way you did something, the way you said something, the call that you made, your interaction with the analyst, whatever that is, that when the game is over, you think to yourself, nah, I don't like the way I did that. It probably, when you go back and watch it, probably wasn't as bad as you thought. And likewise, when you thought, I really nailed that one, it may not be as good as you think it was either. It was good, but it may not be as good or as great as you thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why, you balance it. The highs and the lows, stay consistent. If you've made a mistake or mistakes or had a game that you didn't particularly like, how do you respond the next game? Is it another bad one? Whether it's a player, broadcaster, coach, right? It's all about momentum, right? If you have 5 bad games in a row as an athlete, you're trending in the wrong direction, right?
Yep.
The best people rebound from the average or the bad games in anything that they do.
Yeah, 100%. I just recently watched that Steph Curry where he had his worst performance ever, 0 for 10, followed it up, breaking the NBA record the next game, 13 for 17. And I was watching a video of it, and they showed the last shot he took of the 0 for 10. A guy had a hand in his face, and he still took the shot. He had air balls in that game. He had off the bat. It was just brick after brick. And then what does he do? That he takes the next shot, right? Because he knows that he can do it.
Right.
And you got to have that confidence.
You do. Got to be motivated. Got to know what you can do. Also know what your limitations are as well, right? So don't overdo it. Do what you're capable of doing in anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, JP. This has been a pleasure, and there's just a lot of leadership gold in this conversation we were able to have. So I'm so grateful for you, what you've been doing for decades, and I just grateful that you're going to keep on doing it. So thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Phil and Paul, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, JP.
Well, folks, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for tuning in and for downloading this episode, and for all the other episodes that you're engaging with. Please do engage with us. You can reach out to us, Phil at howsoccerexplainsleadership.com. You can also check out what Paul and Marcy are doing with the Warrior Way at warriorwaysoccer.com, and what I'm doing with Christian DeVries at coachingthebiggergame.com. So you can check all that stuff out at the show notes. Anything we referred to on this episode, you can check that out at the website. So thank you so much, everybody. And remember, we hope that you're taking everything that you're learning from this show and you're using it to be a better person, a better leader, a better coach, better parent, better spouse, better in everything that you do. And that you continually remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.